as usual, I apologize in advance for any background noise you may hear. Like, just then. Yeah, my house gets pretty noisy, so. But I wouldn't be able to. I'm not gonna be able to record again, like, for the rest of the day, so I have to do this now if I want to do it at all. So yeah, again, I apologize for that, but yeah, I hope you guys had a wonderful day or evening or whatever time it is for you right now, and just sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Chapter 18, Part 1. Once Held Dear, Part 1. What are you? What are you? I managed to stammer out. Despite having lived 2 lives, what my eyes saw, my brain refused to believe. A monster, for lack of a better word, which easily towered over 10 meters high, was seated cross-legged on a crudely carved throne of jagged stone, with an arm lazily supporting its head. Its petrifying red eyes that gazed down at me, while menacing, carried an oddly tranquil quality. 2 massive horns protruded out of the sides of its head and arched down and around its skull, curving up to a point near the front, reminding me of something almost akin to a crown. It had a mouth with 2 fangs pinking out of its lips, and while its body was adorned in a sleek black armor that had neither decorations nor embellishments, it still glowed with the quality of a priceless treasure. Reiterating the fact that I was once a king, still, this being that stood before me now made me embarrassed of even having the nerve to call myself one. No, the one sitting on that giant throne was a being that would make even the most unfaithful heretics bow down in submission. Yet here it was, in all its glory, with its head resting on its arm, while its other hand nonchalantly scratched its nose. What I had failed to notice until now, though, because of the dim lighting in the cave and its body being completely black, was that this being had a gaping hole in the side of its chest, blood continuously oozing out. "We finally meet," it repeated with a lazy half-smile that revealed a row of pointed teeth. I tried getting up, but failed halfway and ended up back on my butt, my face still slack from the shock of what my eyes were seeing. "Bugs will fly into your mouth if you keep it open that wide." Great, at least it has a sense of humor. As for what I am, I won't say anything more than what you can see from looking, the horned humanoid monster said with its eyes seeming to gaze straight through me. "It is going to take a while for me to open a dimensional rift that would transport you to your house, so until then, just be patient and wait here. There are special roots that grow here. You will be able to live off of those until I finish," it sighed. That's right, that's what I was here to do. I managed to regain a bit of my composure, and I stood up, walking a little closer to the being. Giving a courteous bow, I replied, "Thank you for everything you've done for me and what you will do. If there's any way I can repay you, I will do for you whatever is in my power." Such good manners for a child. Do not worry, I am expecting neither a favor nor your gratitude. I am simply doing this for my own amusement. Come, sit here closer to me and keep me company. I haven't talked to anyone in a while. The being laughed, patting an area of his throne for me to sit on. I climbed up the platform rather awkwardly, forgetting to use mana to just jump up and prop to myself on the throne next to the being. Excuse me for being rude, but you don't exactly look like a lady. How should I address you?" I said, making eye contact with the being. "You're right, I don't exactly look like a lady, now do I? I wonder why I said that." "My name is Sylvia," she replied, letting out a soft chuckle. This giant demon lord-like monster looked like anything but a Sylvia to me, but I chose to keep that to myself Sylvia, do you mind if I ask a few questions? Go ahead, young one, although I may not be able to answer everything. I immediately rattled off all of the questions that had been on my mind ever since waking up and after meeting Sylvia. Where is this place? Why were you here all alone? Where did you come from? Why do you have that huge wound? And why did you save me? She patiently waited for me to finish before replying. You must have had a lot on your mind. The first question is easy to answer. This place is a narrow zone between the Beast Glades and the Forest of Elshire. No one knows of this place because I've been warding off anyone who came close. Although the cases are rare in the first place, you, young child, are the first to enter into this domain, she easily explained. Please call me Art. My name is Arthur Lewin, but everyone calls me Art. You can too. I blurted out before shutting my mouth in my hands, confused as to why I was acting like an excited child. He's finally acting his age. Very well, child. I will call you Art. Her red eyes glazed, looking afar while answering my next questions. Continuing on to your second question, I am here alone simply because I have no one left to be with. While I do not think telling you everything would be wise, I will tell you that I have many enemies that desperately wish for something that I have. My last battle with my enemies left this wound. As for where I come from, very far away. There was a moment of pause before Sylvia continued on, this time her eyes looking straight at me, almost studying me. As for why I saved you, even I do not fully know the answer to that question. Perhaps I have been alone for far too long and I simply wish to have someone to talk to. I first noticed you when your party was engaged in battle with the bandits. When you fell off the cliff to save your mother, I felt compelled to save you, thinking it was a waste for such a good child to die. You are very brave. It is rare for even an adult to be able to do that. I shook my head. I was scared too, and I didn't have much of an option. I just wanted to save my mother and my baby sibling inside her. I didn't know if it was from the gentle way she talked or because of how big and powerful she seemed, but in front of her I seemed to turn into a child. No, I was a child in front of her. I see. Your mother was pregnant. You must miss them dearly. Rest assured, your family and party are safe. As for where they have gone, my sight cannot reach far enough to tell anymore. A wave of relief washed over me as I had to do my utmost to keep tears from falling. I see, they're safe. This new life brought about emotions I thought I'd never experienced in my previous life. Thank God that they're alive. They're okay. I let out a sniffle. Sylvia's giant hand reached down as she softly patted my head with a finger. The day passed by with me conversing with Sylvia, picking up some roots in between to eat that looked and tasted very similar to potatoes, but were black in color. We talked about all sorts of things to pass the time as she prepared to open a portal. At one point, she asked me how I was able to use mana so well at my age. I was under the impression that amongst humans, the earliest mage to have awakened so far was the age of 10, and even then, because the child couldn't grasp how to use it, there was very little he could do with it. Yet, not only have you already formed your mana core, but by the way you use your mana, you seem to be more efficient than a lot of fully fledged mages. Because our boy's a genius. I just shrugged, feeling oddly proud by her compliment. My parents said I was a genius or something. I can read really well, and I get what the pictures and words in the books are saying. Yeah, right. I can read really well. Yeah, you're a grown-ass man. A few more days trickled by as Sylvia continued preparing the portal. In a regretful tone, she explained one day, "The spell will take some time in order for it to be completely safe. I do not wish for you to land in a destination you are not familiar with. Even one inconsistency can lead days, while I trained my mana core and chatted with Sylvia, I noticed a few things. Sylvia really made me think of the cliche, don't judge a book by its cover. Contrary to her intimidating appearance, she was kind, gentle, patient, and warm. She reminded me of my mother and the way that they both scolded me while being tender when I did something wrong. I mentioned how the mage that I fought, as well as the other bandits, deserved worse deaths than they had when she suddenly flicked my forehead. Even though she was gentle, a flick of a finger from someone over 10 meters high was nothing to make light of. I was sent tumbling on the ground before angrily spouting, "What was that for?" Picking me up and setting me on her armored knee, she said in a soft but pained tone, "Art, perhaps you are not wrong in that those bandits did deserve death. Even I chose not to save that mage you fell with for the same reasons. However, do not let your heart be clouded with continuous thoughts of hatred and the sword. Continue on proudly with your life and gain the strength to protect your loved ones from harm. Along the way, you will come to face situations like before, maybe even worse, but don't let the grief and rage corrode your heart. Move on and learn to better yourself from those experiences so it won't happen again." I blinked, a bit stunned by the fact that I was being lectured on morals by someone that looked like the epitome of evil herself. Strangely, it stuck to me as I just responded with a blank nod. Another thing I noticed was that her wound seemed to be getting bigger. At first, I found it somewhat odd that she could still be alive with a gaping hole in the side of her chest, but I grew numb to it. That is, until a couple of days ago, I noticed the wound seemed to be bleeding more profusely. Sylvia tried to hide it at first with her hand, but it was growing more and more obvious. Noticing my concerned gaze towards the wound, Sylvia gave me a weak smile and said, "Do not worry, little one. This wound festers from time to time." One day, as I was meditating and using strict movement techniques to better control my mana, Sylvia suddenly interrupted. "Art, try absorbing mana while you are making movements. Ideally, you should be able to absorb at least a fraction of the mana you would during meditation while you are fighting. Although you would be spending mana faster than you can absorb mana, you will be able to prolong the usage of your mana." That brought about memories of me thinking about this exact idea. I had forgotten about testing my hypothesis since I wasn't able to move as freely as I could now. I was so used to having absorption of mana and the manipulation of mana as two separate things that I hadn't stopped to think about the possibilities in this new world. Let me try. Humans have a very linear mindset in regards to mana and find it hard to deviate from anything that already works. Practice hard now though, because you can only acquire this skill while both your body and mana core are immature. Even mana beasts learn to do this naturally, but humans awaken much too late, and in most cases, their bodies are not adept for this ability when they first awaken. Considering you are so young, there shouldn't be a problem if you practice, continued Sylvia with a proud puff of her nose. I had to admit that, like testing most theories, it was extremely difficult at first. It reminded me of the exercises my caretaker at the orphanage had shown us when I was younger. The ones where you tried to make each of your arms do something different, except much harder. Practicing this essentially meant being able to fight proficiently, while still maintaining a constant inward flow of mana. Sylvia's only advice was that, according to her, an exceptional mage must be able to split his thinking mind into multiple segments in order to process information at an efficient speed. While I've never had a teacher tell me to split my mind, I tried doing as she said. Needless to say, I had never tripped over my own body so many times in this and my previous life combined. This, at least, seemed to get a few hearty chuckles of amusement out of Sylvia. 2 months had passed since then, as I kept Sylvia company with stories of my family and the town I was born in, while continuing to improve in the technique thanks to Sylvia's patience and my diligence. Sylvia refused to tell me the name of this skill, so I named it myself, Mana Rotation. Over this period of time, it would be an understatement to say I'd merely gotten close to Sylvia. She had treated me like her own blood grandson, and in response, I'd grown attached to this demon lord grandmother. It was because of our growing relationship that I wasn't able to simply ignore what was happening. It was frustratingly clear that her wound was growing worse as the portal responsible for taking me home was becoming more distinct. Sylvia, please tell me what's happening to your wound. Why is it getting worse? It wasn't like this before. You saying it was only a fester of an own that was clearly a lie. This isn't going to go away on its own. It's actually getting worse. I frustratingly voiced my concern. One especially bad night after she had vomited up a pool of blood. I paused for a second, struck with realization. Why didn't I notice this before? She had been getting worse while creating the portal in order to send me home. She was sacrificing her life so I could meet my family again. Sylvia let out a deep breath, knowing that I had realized what was going on. Managing a sheepish smile, Sylvia whispered, Art, yes, I am dying, but I will get angry if you blame yourself thinking that you are causing this. I have been dying for quite a while now. You are doing me a favor by allowing me to leave this forsaken cave a bit faster. As soon as she finished speaking, a bright golden glow radiated out of her body. Shielding my eyes from going blind, I tried to focus on the shape forming from where Sylvia once sat. In place of the 10-meter Titan-like figure was a dragon even larger. From her snout to the end of her tail, she was clad in a pearl-white coat of shimmering scales. Beneath her iridescent lavender eyes were glowing golden runes that marked her neck and ran down the spread around her body and tail like sacred engravings. These markings reminded me of a very elegant, almost celestial tribal pattern, branching out harmoniously and with purpose, like carefully placed vines. The dragon's wings were pure white, adorned with white-bladed feathers so fine and sharp that they could put swords forged by master smiths to shame. The golden light enveloping the dragon dimmed until it fully replaced the once titan-like shaped being. There now. Do I look a bit more like a Sylvia? She let out with a doogly smirk. I love Sylvia. She's like one of my favorite characters. Even though, like, obviously she's dying, so we don't get to see her for long, which sucks, but I love her so much. She's literally Arthur's grandma. Like, oh god, okay. So, next chapter, chapter 20, One's Held Dear, part 3. Sylvia, you're a dragon, I said. Now that I am in this form, we do not have much time. Yes, I am something you humans refer to as dragons. The reason that I am dying is because I had been inflicted with this wound after narrowly escaping my captors. I had sensed one of them approaching dangerously close a few days ago, so I feel that my time of hiding is drawing to an end. This form will alert them of my location, which is why I only have time to explain what is necessary. I am giving you this to take care of from now on. One of her bladed wings unfolded and revealed a translucent, rainbow-colored stone the size of 2 fists. With a myriad of colors and shades, this stone resonated an aura that made me hesitate in holding it, as if I wasn't worthy. Without waiting for me to respond, she continued, Everything will reveal itself when the time comes, so just hold on to this and do not let anyone know that you have this. Most will not know what it is, but everyone will be attracted by the aura it emits. Sylvia then proceeded to pluck a feather from her wings with her claw and hand it to me. Wrap the stone in this to conceal it. After doing as told, the once divine radiant stone merely appeared to be a smooth white rock, pretty but ordinary. While I was studying the feather encased stone, I was suddenly up to see Sylvia's purple eyes and the gold markings blazed brighter than they had when she first transformed. As the markings grew dimmer and then disappeared, Sylvia pierced her tongue into my core and wisped out a golden smoke that crackled in sparks of purple. A sharp yelp escaped my mouth as I blinked, confused and surprised. I continued to just stare at her as she moved her head back, leaving a trail of blood from a hole in my worn-down shirt. My sternum bled, but when I ran my hand through the area, there was no wound. Sylvia's expression had grown visibly pained and weak. It was apparent even for a mighty dragon that was even bigger than her previous illusion. What caught my attention, though, was that her once shimmering purple irises were now just a dim yellow, with the beautiful runes that flowed across her face and body now gone. Before I had the chance to ask what she had done, a giant explosion interrupted me. I whipped my head up to see that the ceiling of the cave had been blown off, and what came into vision was a figure that reminded me of Sylvia's previous form. Clad in sleek black armor and a blood-red cape that matched its eyes, the figure's pale gray skin matched the clouded sky in the background. The horns were different, though, as this entity had two horns that curled down and under its ears, lining its chin. Sylvia immediately covered me with one of her wings in time to protect me from the falling debris, and probably keep me hidden from our visitor. Lady Sylvia, I advise you to stop your stubbornness and hand it over. You've already caused us quite the trouble after hiding yourself. If you submit, the Lord may even heal your wound, the entity reasoned impatiently. Immediately after he had finished speaking, the world around me seemed to pause. Everything but Sylvia and myself. The colors of the world were as though it was being seen through an inverted lens. What surprised me the most was that everything was still. The entity, the clouds behind him, and even the falling debris of the ceiling. Ignoring the enemy, Sylvia casually peeked under her wing. I'll open the portal now. I didn't have the time to make it go directly to your home, but it should take you to a place with humans nearby. Do not let him see you and do not look back, she whispered, her eyes solemn. I ignored Sylvia's instructions after I heard what the entity had promised. Sylvia, is what he said true? If you turn yourself over, will you be able to live? Do not trust his honey-coated words. It would be worse off for you if you are found right now. As for me, I would rather die than go back to where he is, Sylvia said, impatience and anger mixed in her voice. No, I won't let you die here. If you refuse to go with him, then please just come with me, I begged. Unfortunately, I cannot go with you. You will forever be in danger if any of them finds out you have had contact with me. I need to stay here. Sylvia gently wiped my cheeks with a claw, her draconic eyes lined with what I saw as tears. Oh my god. You asked me once why I chose to save you. The truth was to satisfy my own greed. I wanted to keep you as my own child, even for just a little bit. I intentionally prolonged the transportation spell because I wished to spend more time with you, but it seems I didn't even have the chance to finish it. I'm sorry, little art, for my selfishness, but I have one last request to make. Can you be my grandson and call me grandmother just this once? No, I don't care about all that. I'll say it as much as you want. If you come with me, Grandma, you can't. Please, I'm begging you, just come with me. I don't know what you did, but everything is frozen right now. We can escape. Please, Grandma, don't go. Not like this. I held on to Sylvia's claw, desperately trying to pull her away with me. In my last moment with her, Sylvia's face blossomed into such a beautiful smile that I swear I thought I saw a human. I could barely make out the words she said before she pushed me into the portal. Thank you, my child. Oh, God. It's just as sad as I remember. Oh, God. Man. I hate it. I wish we got more of Sylvia. Oh, it's so sad. When I first read like this part in the comic, I was torn to pieces. Like I couldn't handle it. I think I might have actually teared up some, like when I first read this. I was a little more prepared for it this time, but I'm still kind of emotional. Like, especially, like, after he starts calling her grandma so frantically, and he's just, like, begging her to come with him. It's so sad. It's so sad. Oh, well. Okay. So, on to the next chapter. Chapter 21. Road Ahead, Part 1. The trip through the dimensional rift invoked a very peculiar sensation. It felt as if I was trapped in the middle of a fast-forwarded movie scene. My surroundings were whizzing by in an indistinct blur of colors as I sat on my ass, staring blankly off in the distance with no more tears left to cry. Oh God, it hurts. The ground I landed on cushioned my fall with a pile of leaves and vines. It didn't matter though. Even if I landed on jagged rocks, I probably wouldn't have noticed. I remained in the same seated position I was in during the trip, not even bothering to take in my surroundings. She was gone. I would never have the chance to see her again. Those two thoughts triggered another wave of emotions as I heaved out dry sobs. Poor Arthur. I began recalling the near 4 months we had spent together. How caring she was, treating me like her own family. I didn't care that she had prolonged sending me home so that I would stay with her. Through the short time I had been with Sylvia, she had taught me so much and given me insight that I had been lacking since coming to this world. Succumbing to the faculty of my mind that desired sleep in order to cope with the pain, I curled up into a ball where I landed when a searing pain propped me back up. The burning sensation spread from my mana core throughout my body until a voice echoed in my head. Testing. Good. Hello, Art. This is Sylvia. My heart fluttered as I instantly responded to the voice. Sylvia, I'm here. Can you hear? If you're listening to this right now, it means I have shown you what I actually am. It was some kind of recording that she had infused into me when she gouged a small hole into my mana core. You're nowhere near ready right now to know the whole truth. Knowing you, if I were to have told you that figure in the sky had been, you would have brashly tried to fight him. Little Art, you are barely past the age of 4. Upon looking at your mana core, I have realized that you have a rare talent. Seeing as your mana core is already dark red in color, I will leave you with this. I have infused you with my unique will. Let's fucking go. This is something incomparable to a normal beast's will. Your future progress as a mage depends on how well you will be able to use my will that is embedded into your mana core. Hell yeah. Was that why the purple in her eyes and golden patterns disappeared? The moment your mana core reaches a level past the white stage is when you will hear from me again. At that time, I will explain everything, and what you do from there is your choice. There was a stage past white. Lastly, Art, I know you may be in grief, but remember that you have your family to look out for and the stone I entrusted you with. My only wish is for you to embrace the joys and innocence of childhood, train hard, and make your parents and I proud. Do not go chasing after shadows in a fit of rage. Killing the ones that are responsible for my death will neither bring me back to life nor make you feel better. There is a reason for everything, and I do not regret what has happened. With this, I bid you farewell for now. Remember, protect your family and the stone. Study what I have left you, and enjoy this life, King Grey. Yes, I remember this part. Okay, I'm sorry for the random break in the middle of the story, but I remember this part. When I first read this part in the comic, I lost my mind. Like, how the hell does she know? Oh my god. I mean, we find out later, but like, holy shit, I was losing my mind. Oh, it's so cool. I love this book. That name and title was from my previous life. She had known the entire time. this knowing what my life back in my old world was like. I can't make the same mistake of living for the sake of solely pursuing strength. I wanted to be strong, but I also want to live my life without regret. I want to live a life that Sylvia would be proud of. I don't think she'd be happy even if I reached whatever stage was after white while living a life of only training. Now I needed to hurry and reach my family. But before that, where the hell was I? Looking around, trees that towered high over my head surrounded me. There was a dense fog that loomed thickly a couple of centimeters off the ground, filling the air with nearly palpable moisture. Trees and unnaturally thick fog. I sank back on my butt, crestfallen at what this could only mean. I was in the forest of Elshire. A disheartened sigh escaped from my mouth as I picked myself up. It seemed like I won't be meeting my family anytime soon. It had been over 4 months and I had fallen off the cliff. My family had most likely either gone back to Ashbur or had maybe even decided to stay in Cyrus. I didn't have any sort of provisions except for the clothes on my back and the strange stone that was wrapped in Sylvia's feather. This cursed fog limited my vision to about a few meters around me. While reinforcing my eyes with mana helped quite a bit, that didn't solve the even bigger problem of how to get out of this place. I reinforced my body, enabling mana rotation that had become second nature to me by now. Right now I could only absorb about roughly 20% of what I could do while just meditating, but I couldn't complain. The only downside to mana rotation was that it wasn't a replacement for strengthening your mana core. In order for me to purify my mana core and get into the next stages, I need to solely focus on gathering mana from both my body and the surrounding atmosphere, and use that to get rid of the impurities little by little. One notable thing I felt was that after getting my mana core to dark red, the amount of mana I could store inside increased significantly. While the size didn't increase, I'm guessing the purity allowed more mana to be stored. I climbed a few branches up the nearest tree and situated myself once I got high enough. I focused mana into only my eyes, enhancing my vision even further. What I was looking for wasn't a way out, but more so for any signs of humans. Sylvia had said that I would be teleported close to humans, so I was hoping that there were adventurers traveling through here that would direct me, or even escort me out of the forest. After about 10 minutes of searching, jumping from tree to tree, I found what I was looking for. I hopped a few more trees, feeling quite proud of my primate nimbleness, stopping at a branch just a few meters away. Hiding myself behind the thick trunk, I observed a group of humans. Something was off. I hid myself completely behind the trunk and closed my eyes, imbuing mana into my ears. No, help! Someone please help! Mommy, Daddy, no, I'm scared. Someone shut her up, she's going to attract attention. Thud. Quick, put her in the back of the carriage. We're only a few days away from the mountain range. We'll be safer then. Don't relax and keep moving. Hey boss, how much do you reckon she'll sell for? Elf girls go for a lot, don't they? She's his child too, so a virgin at that. I bet she'll fetch us a lot of money, huh? Slave traders. I carefully took a peek to spot the small-sized carriage, enough to tightly cram in about 5 or 6 adults. I turned back around just in time to see a middle-aged man hauling a little girl into the back of the carriage. She looked to be around 6 or 7, with a silvery hue in her hair, and the trademark pointed ears that elves were known for. What should I do? How were they even able to kidnap one in the first place? The Elshire Forest's magical fog was supposed to disorient the senses of even the most capable mage. After a few more seconds of observing, I found my answer. Attached to leashes were mana beasts that looked like a mix between a deer and a dog, with antlers that branched out like a complicated satellite. They were mentioned briefly in the encyclopedia I always carried with me. The forest hounds were native to the forest of Elshire and could navigate even better than the elves could. How those brutes acquired forest hounds, I had no idea, but I needed to think of a plan. Option 1. Steal one of the forest hounds and have it lead me out of the forest. Option 2. Kidnap the kidnapped elf girl to have her lead I saved the elf girl, she wouldn't leave me out of the forest and just insist on going back home, and the slave traders probably wouldn't take it too kindly. Option 3 had the best outcome, but was by far the most pain in the butt, considering there were 4 of them and only 1 of me. Because of the fog, I couldn't sense if any of them were mages, but it was safe to assume that at least 1 of them would be. Being able to capture an elf in the forest meant that they were either very lucky or professionals. After letting out another deep breath, I couldn't help but notice how often I sighed these days. Option 3 it was. Arthur's about to get in them cheeks, boy. Oh, these slave traders should have just stayed home, dude. They should have just stayed home, chose a different profession. Okay. Next chapter, chapter 22, Road Ahead, part 2. After hours of observation, I had learned enough about them to make a move. I waited until nightfall to put my plan in action. Despite their rustic appearances, the slave traders were surprisingly vigilant. They never built a fire and always kept 2 people on guard at all times. After stirring up the forest hounds with a carefully thrown rock, I made my move as soon as one of the 2 on guard went around to the other side of the carriage to quiet them. The one that stayed behind was sitting on a fallen log, fiddling with something in his hands, while the other 2 were sleeping inside the tent. Carefully jumping to a branch directly above the carriage, I prepared for my attack. My first target would be the one that had gone to quiet the forest hounds first. I dropped down with a quiet thud behind one of the slave traders. This man had a very lanky build. While lean muscles were visible, he didn't seem too strong and was only armed with a long knife. Startled by the soft thud, Lanky turned around, probably expecting a curious weasel or rat. His face twisted into a mixture of surprise and amusement when he saw me, a 4-year-old child in ragged clothes. But before he had the chance to even speak, I lunged upwards towards his neck. I infused mana into the blade of my hand, turning it into a sharp edge. This was called the swordless art in my old world, but here it would be more accurate to call it a wind attribute technique. He flinched back reflexively, his hands trying to reach where his face was to guard against the boy shooting towards him. It was too late. I took a quick swipe at the jugular, taking his vocal cord out along with his carotid artery. A stream of blood sprayed out of his neck immediately as I landed behind him. Supporting his lifeless body and gently placing him down to avoid making noise. Just as expected, the forest hounds that had just been calmed by Lanky jolted back awake at the stench of blood, causing them to howl and bark. Hey, Pinky. Can't even calm the hounds. What the? I had already picked up Pinky's knife and was waiting for him at the back corner of the carriage. While the other slave trader's attention was directed at the corpse of Pinky, currently being eaten by the forest hounds, I jumped out from behind and stabbed the side of his neck with the knife. The hounds quieted down while devouring the 2 corpses. As I headed towards the tent to dispose of the remaining 2 in their sleep, a shrill cry ruined my plans. Help! Mommy! Someone! Anyone! Please! Son of a... Why now of all times? On cue, I heard the rustle of the tent as the 2 slave traders that were left had come out. Pinky, Deuce, the kid is awake. What the hell are you guys? He barked, still half asleep. I swallowed down the inappropriate urge to laugh at the ridiculous names of the slave traders and hid myself behind a tree next to the carriage to infuse mana into Pinky's knife. Sensing something was amiss, the 2 remaining slave traders carefully stepped around to the other side of the carriage, where their eyes bulged upon witnessing their 2 former companions being eaten by the forest hounds. Using this chance, I attacked the nearest one when his gaze whipped back at me, his short sword instantly swinging at my face. Dodging the slash, I dropped low and dashed toward him, trying to get in range with my knife. I swung, reinforcing more mana into the knife, landing a clean wound through his right leg's Achilles heel. He let out a pained howl as he dove desperately out of my range before I could do any further damage. Taunton, be careful. I think this brat is a mage, the fighter whose tendon I just severed cried. I turned my attention to Danton as he pulled out his sword from his sheath and lowered into a defensive stance. You see all sorts of crazy things these days. Looks like a huge sack of gold just showed itself in front of us, George. I bet he'll get us almost as much as the elf. He let out a crazed chuckle. These bastards didn't even care that I just killed their party members. necessary to use that further increased his range. Wasting no time, Danton dashed towards me and threw back the knife I had just launched at him. I easily dodged, but not in time to react for his next move as he swiped my ankle with his sheath. As I stumbled to regain balance, he used that chance to grab hold of my ankle and flip me upside down. His confident face crumpled as I punched the hand that was holding on to me as I concentrated mana. I used a fire attribute technique of releasing all of the mana focused on my fist and aimed for the weak point of his wrist. Whew. A large crack, followed by a howl of profanities, indicated the attack was enough. His broken wrist released my ankle and I landed awkwardly on my back. Quickly jumping up to my feet, I picked up Pinky's knife and used the chance to charge towards the wounded Danton. While he was still preoccupied by the pain from his wrist, he angrily cursed, "You're dead now, you piece of shit. I don't care if I can't sell you anymore." His left wrist was wounded, leaving a gap in his defense. I willed more mana into my feet and arrived in range, about to land a solid hit to his side, when I saw him furiously swinging his sword down. He fell for it. I quickly pivot with my left foot in place, spinning to my right. Dodging the swing by hair's breadth, I entered into my knife's range, to his right side open because of his last desperate swing. He immediately tried to jump back, but I placed my right foot behind his leg, making him lose his balance. In one quick thrust, I jabbed my knife below his armpit, through the gap between his ribs and into his lungs. He was easy to finish off after his lungs collapsed from the wound. I was now left with the immobile George. I couldn't use Danton's sword since it was too large and heavy for my body, so I made use of Pinky's knife one last time and swiped George's jugular. The poor fighter couldn't really contest or run away with his useless leg and died with a look of disbelief, much like his two comrades, fed to the hounds. It seemed that the elf girl knew there was fighting going on by her eerie quietness. I jumped up onto the back of the carriage where she was locked up, and I spotted her shivering in the corner with dirty rags minimally covering her privates. She studied me in surprise and doubted her eyes, almost saying, "You can't have been the one who saved me, right?" I untied her as she remained silent, her swollen turquoise eyes never leaving my face. Tired and feeling gross, I helped her up and simply stated, "You should go back home now." She probably didn't know whether I was an enemy or friend until now, but once the word home was said, a look of relief rushed over her tense face and she broke down. "I was so scared. They were going to sell me. I thought I was never going to see my family again. Wow." Here we go. Here's the introduction to Best Girl. Or I guess I should say the introduction to Arthur's harem. Oh boy. I love their relationship though. It's really cute and it feels very natural. Anyway, Chapter 23, To and Fro, Part 1. It had felt like a good hour before the little elf girl was finally able to settle down. I didn't blame her. Being forcefully kidnapped would cause trauma for even for adults, even more so since she seemed to be only a bit older than I was. As I sat next to her, comforting her, I realized how bizarre of a scene this made. A 4-year-old boy tenderly patting the head of an elfin girl in the back of a carriage, as 4 bloody corpses were being devoured by beasts next to them. "What happened to those bad guys?" she sniffled, her voice coming out a bit nasally. Not knowing if telling the 7-year-old about killing was appropriate, I simply dismissed it by telling her they ran into a very unfortunate accident. She studied the hesitant expression on my face with the raise of a brow, only to look back down and whisper, "Serves them right." Looking closely at her now, I couldn't help but notice that she carried all the necessary features that would allow her to blossom into quite the beauty later on in the future. With long gunmetal gray hair that I mistook for silver in the sunlight, the girl's disheveled state couldn't mask the innate beauty that seemed to radiate from her pores. A pair of gleaming teal eyes shaped like perfectly rounded almonds quivered in her perky nose, so red from crying, matched the color of her rosy lips. This is kinda weird. Like, I get he's describing like her features or whatnot, but it's just kinda weird that, cause like she's 7, or actually I don't remember how old she is, but I know she's like very young. I don't know. While all of her individual facial features seemed to be carefully molded gems on the fair creamy skin of her face that was the canvas, her features were brought into a surreal, almost phantasmal work of art. Yeah, this would be like a way you would describe like a love interest in a romance novel. Like, I get this is like, yeah, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Of course, this was me just observing her speculatively as a gentleman and king who enjoyed beauty in the world. I wouldn't go as far to say I was checking her out. Okay, so okay, so I wasn't the only one that thought so. Got it. I helped her up to her feet before speaking again. Those people that tried to kidnap you aren't going to chase you anymore. That being said, do you think you can make it to your home by yourself? Instantly, her eyes retracted in fear as a panicked expression spread throughout the rest of her face. As tears welled up and both her hands clenched tightly to my shirt, even an infant would be able to tell what her answer was through her action. Look, I need to get home too. Aren't elves generally safe in this forest? I let out a sigh, trying to pry her fingers, from my shirt. She violently shook her head, much like a dog trying itself, and rebutted, "Beasts are only scared of adults. My parents warned me that children will get eaten by hounds or tree golems." I would normally be pretty amazed by something like a tree golem, but it was becoming pretty hard to find something that surprised me after witnessing a demon king metamorph into a dragon. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, trying to come up with a solution for all of this. How long does it take to get to where you live from here? Still holding onto my shabby shirt, she looked down and admitted, "I don't know." I held in the temptation to let out another sigh, since the poor girl looked like she was about to cry already, and agreed to take her back home. The kingdom of Eleanor was quite a long ways north, so my only hope was that there would be a teleportation gate there that could take me back to somewhere anywhere in Sapin. I instructed the elf girl to wait inside the carriage while I gathered some necessities, the main reason being I didn't want her to see the mangled carcasses of the slave traders when even I found it hard to stomach. Finally finding a backpack small enough for me to wear without it dragging on the ground, I carefully folded and stuffed a small tent inside, along with a leather water bag and some dried rations. I picked up Pinky's knife from the ground where I fought Danton and George and strapped it to the front of my waist to balance the awkwardly large equipment on my back. Before heading back into the carriage, I freed the forest hounds after realizing that, while they were able to pull a carriage, they weren't able to be ridden. I thought briefly about riding the carriage to the Elven Kingdom, but thought it was too dangerous and we would stick out like sore thumbs in the forest. "Let's head out for now," I said, trying to sound more enthusiastic for her safe. And I don't know why she said that. She nodded, hopping out of the carriage as I led her away from the carriage where all of the dead bodies were. Oh man. Yeah. Okay, so very important character, mind you. Like she's a very important character. So I actually really like this part and like them interacting with each other when they're younger. Okay. Chapter 24, To and Fro, Part 2. I learned a lot about the elf girl along the way. For one, her name was Tessia Aerolith, and she had actually just turned 5, which meant that she was about a year older than I was, albeit physiologically, that is. Tessia was also a pretty reserved, if not shy, girl. She was very polite to me considering I was younger than she was, and never complained, making her a very agreeable traveling companion. Perhaps if I wasn't traveling in the opposite direction of my destination, I would have actually enjoyed having her travel with me. With the sun setting and the fog thickening, we pitched a tent underneath the sprouted roots of a particularly large tree for the night. I couldn't fit any of the supporting rods in the backpack, so I used the long rope I brought with me instead, tied it to 2 of the roots and hung the tent canvas over it, weighing down the ends with moss-covered rocks. After I finished setting up the tent, I took out a couple of dried rations and handed some to her. "Thank you very much," she gave a slight nod. I'm sorry if some of my words seem kind of like slurred or something. My braces kind of, like if I talk too much, like my glands in my mouth because of my braces, like I start to get weird. I don't know. You don't have to be so polite to me. I am younger than you, and I'd feel a lot more comfortable if you weren't so on edge. I replied, my cheeks full of dried food. Okay, I'll try. She let out a shy smile as she held back a chuckle. I began wondering if she had been raised by very strict parents. Maybe it was simply an elf custom, and by telling her to be more comfortable with me, I was inadvertently inviting her to marry me. Giving her a shrug, I resumed stuffing my face with more food. We sat underneath one of the roots of the tree next to our tent and continued chatting. Can you tell me about the human kingdom? She suddenly asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. What did you want to know? What is a human city like? How are humans? Is it true that all male humans are perverts and have more than one wife? I choked on the dried fruits I was chewing on, spraying them out before they got caught in my lungs. No, although it isn't against the law, only nobility and the royal families tend to have multiple wives. I said after composing myself, wiping my mouth. I see now, her eyes seemed to say, still sparkling. Do you really? I go on explaining a bit about the town of Ashburn and my family to pass the time before I asked as well. What is it like living in Eleanor? She pondered a bit before finding the words to explain. I don't think it's too different from what you told me about where you grew up, except the children will have to go to school to learn about our history and how to read and write. When we awaken, we get mentors assigned to us and we become their disciples. From there, a lot of it is just training with your master. I see. I mutter, pondering about the different education systems of the humans and elves. While the educational method of the elves was a lot more advanced and undiscriminating, it only worked because the elven kingdom was much smaller and tightly knit compared to the human kingdom. But it just went to show how culture made such a big difference in the future generations. Getting up from the ground, I held my hand out to help her get up. I noticed her hesitation when she turned a little red, but I assumed it was just my eyes playing with me in the dark. Sleep in the tent. I'll keep guard next to you outside. I see her thinking for a little as her eyes fixed on me full of resolve. I don't mind sharing the tent if you're okay with it. She tried to sound nonchalant, but her voice betrayed her. It's okay, I'm not that sleepy right now anyway, I replied a lot faster than I had meant to. Okay, she sulked. Did her ears just droop a little? Making sure she went inside the tent, I leaned against the massive tree trunk and began meditating. I started inspecting my mana core. Sylvia left me with something she calls her will, but how did that affect my mana core? Inspecting even closer, I noticed ever so faintly some markings in my mana core when... Arthur, Desia's head poked out of the tent. Is there something wrong? I asked, turning my head to face her. Well, you see, beasts will more likely appear if they notice you because they will see that you are a child. Therefore, I propose that for our safety, it would be better for you to come inside the tent. At this point, Tessie had covered her face with the tent's opening flap, peeking only with one eye. Tessia, are you scared to sleep by yourself in the tent? I chuckled. Absolutely not. I was just suggesting for both of our safety what the best choice would be, she insisted, leaning out, nearly tumbling out of the tent. If that's the case, then I'll hide up in the tree and continue to be on the lookout. You know, for our safety, I winked. She hid herself back inside the tent before muttering softly, I'm scared to sleep by myself. Smiling to myself, I opened the flap and crawled inside the tent. Caught by surprise, Desia let out a small yelp before immediately lying down with her back to me. Seeing how red her ears were, I easily could see myself enjoying teasing the poor elf. After a few silent moments, she peeked over her shoulder. Can I hold on to your shirt? Seeing her tremble, I remembered that she was just a child. I couldn't imagine how hard it must have been for her. Getting kidnapped, being separated from her family and carried off, not knowing if she'll ever see them again. Scooting closer to her, I gave her head another soft pat as she turned her body and clutched the edge of my tattered shirt. It's so cute. Like, the way they interact is just fucking adorable. Oh man. Okay. Chapter 25, To and Fro, Part 3. My eyes fluttered open on their own, and it took a few seconds to remember where I was. I looked down to see Tessia's head on my lap, her body curled up comfortably. Gently shaking her awake, I whispered, "Tessia, we should head out now." She slowly stirred awake, but when she realized the position we were in, her body shot up with a surprised shriek. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Was I heavy?" "Don't worry about it. Let's fold up the tent," I replied with a wry smile. Her cheeks slightly pink as she nodded in response, and we began packing everything up before resuming our journey. A few more days had passed by fairly uneventfully when, out of nowhere, I was struck with deep aches in my abdomen. The first pains occurred on the third day of the trip. We were inside the tent, Tessie already fast asleep, when a sudden searing ache spread from my sternum. It disappeared soon enough, but even that brief moment caused a pain that left me in shivers. Besides that, the most exciting occurrence was when a couple of forest hounds tried to get close, but a throw of my mana-reinforced knife chased them away. Nights passed as I continued sleeping in the tent with Tessia and her growing more comfortable around me, at least comfortable enough not to get embarrassed every time she woke up. Our conversations became more natural and had less awkward silence, as she began joking around with me, even teasing me about the way I walk. In her words, she said that I tried too hard to sound like an adult. Oh, the way I talk, not the way I walk. Fortunately, my worries that the wave of pain might occur again went. Our pace wasn't impeded by any tree golems or even stronger mana beasts looking for children to snack on. "Can you tell me how far we are from Eleanor now, Tessia?" I asked on a particularly clear morning on the 5th day of our journey. Her elongated ears twitched as she began surveying her surroundings. Suddenly, she ran to a particularly crooked tree and ran her fingers over the trunk. A few minutes of silence went by before she came, visibly excited. "That tree is the one I used to come to with my grandfather sometimes. I remember carving my name into the trunk of the tree when he wasn't looking. We're not too far anymore. I think that if we quicken our pace a little bit, we'll be able to make it by tonight," she said, pointing to the tree. "Sounds good," I answered, following behind her. As lovely as the journey had been, I needed to make my plans to somehow get home, and that wouldn't be possible until I got her home. Although I admit I'd probably miss her after this. "Arthur, you said your family and the people close to you call you Art. I feel that through this journey I have gotten close enough to call you that as well." We were crossing a stream atop a moss-covered log bridge when she suddenly stopped. "So, can I call you Art as well?" Tessia turned around, revealing a wide smile. "Sure, I don't mind," I said, returning her smile. "You don't mind? You could sound a bit more enthusiastic." She stuck her tongue out at me. "I would be honored to be called by Art by you, Your Highness." I made a bow gracious enough for a noble, despite my tattered clothes. "And you may also have the honor of calling me Tess," she giggled, curtsying back at me before turning back around and hopping off the log. We continued on the rest of the day, with only a few quick stops to rest ourselves and replenish our stomachs. Constant use of mana rotation had kept my body from being strained, but it was obvious that Tess was growing wearier. After our last quick rest on a soft patch of moss, we continued forward for the last stretch. Tess and I had gotten a lot closer on this journey. The once shy and reserved elf girl showed bright smiles that were contagious, despite our less than comfortable conditions. She would continue teasing me too, saying that I should call her older sister since she was a whole year older than I was. I teased her back, imitating her when she was crying, rubbing my eyes and yelling, "Wow, Mommy, I'm scared." This turned her bright red. She smacked my arm before she started to pout. Crossing her arms and her lower lip protruding, she stomped off before yelling, "Meanie." It was dusk now, and the fog around us seemed to be getting thicker. My sense of direction was all but useless in this blasted forest, enough so that I could wind up traveling in circles without realizing it. She suddenly turned to me, her face a mixture of happiness and hesitation before she muttered, "Right here." Tess was sucked into the same tree, and what came into vision was a giant wooden door that seemed to be propped up by itself on the ground. Tess grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the door. When she opened it, I was reminded of the portal that Sylvia had pushed me through. The experience didn't feel any better the second time, but I at least knew what to expect. As we softly landed on our feet, arriving at our destination, I immediately rummaged through my bag to make sure I still had the stones Sylvia entrusted me with. It was only after confirming that it was still there did I finally look up and take in the scene around us. Progress. We're about to get introduced to another one of my favorite characters. God, I'm so excited. Okay. Next chapter. Chapter 26. Meeting. Part 1. Pristine. That was the word that popped into my head as I gawked at the elven city. It appeared we had directly teleported right past the gates. What I saw before me were buildings that seemed to be built out of a jade-like material. These jade buildings were so flawless and smooth that each seemed to be carved from a single huge stone. Making this place look even more awe-inspiring were the huge trees that intertwined with the buildings, filling this whole city with a more distinctive and organic ambience. Looking up, I see homes built on unnaturally thick branches, extending out of the massive trunks even larger than the buildings, with smoke drifting out of their chimneys. The entire ground inside the city was covered in a lush field of soft moss, with only the narrow sidewalks and the main road paved with smooth stone. The dense array of branches that fanned out from the trees covered most of the city in a canopy of shade, but there was a warm, luminescent glow throughout the city thanks to numerous floating orbs of light situated in every corner and street. While I stood, slack-jawed, still processing the world around me, a shadow whizzed in front of me, suddenly jolting me awake. Tess was still holding onto my hand when a group of what seemed like guards arrived out of nowhere. These elven warriors emanated a dignified air, all dressed in coordinated black suits with green trimmings and a golden shoulder guard on their left shoulder. These 5 guards all carried a rapier strapped to their waist. I mentally noted that these guards had no sensible aura radiating out of them. Augmenters and conjurers both naturally emit a faint aura from their bodies. The fact that I wasn't able to sense any mana leaking meant one of two things. Their mana cores were at a high enough level where I wasn't able to sense it, or they had enough control over their mana to not let any leak out. Either way, it meant that these guys were as impressive as their attire made them look. The guards ignored my presence as they suddenly kneeled in front of Tess in unison. "We welcome back the royal princess." My gaze flicked back and forth between the guards and Tess, and I'm reminded of the time when I jokingly called her Your Highness. Tessia was actually the princess of this whole kingdom. When I tried to let go of her hand, she suddenly squeezed mine tighter, and in a voice so cold and apathetic that I mistook her voice for someone else's, she said, "You may rise." They stood up with their right fist still crossing their chests when the knight in front spoke. "Princess, we arrived as soon as we saw that the royal teleportation gate had been used." The king and queen are. Before he could finish speaking, I heard a cry not too far away. "My baby! Tessia, you're okay. Oh, my baby." Running towards us was a middle-aged man and woman. From the crown on the man's head and the tiara encircling the woman's forehead, I assumed they were the king and queen. The king's tall, built body was uniformed in a loose, decorated robe. His emerald eyes were pointed upwards and his thin lips were tensed, matching his short military-style hair. While the king had a dignified but somewhat reserved appearance, the queen was breathtaking. Although she was a bit past her youthful stage, her age couldn't mask the beauty she was. Her round eyes shimmered a light blue hue, contrasted well with her lush pink-colored lips. Her silver hair was curled down, flailing past her back as she rushed towards us, her well-proportioned figure visible underneath her dress. The mother's cheeks were lined with tears as the father had a tense expression that looked like he was holding back tears as well. I turned my gaze to see Tess's face visibly soften as she started tearing up as well. I let go of her hand and gently Tessia. It took several minutes for Tess and her parents to settle down. In the meantime, the guards were glaring at me with daggers in their eyes, and even the elder was eyeing me curiously. The king finally stood up, and while his eyes were red, he still carried an air of dignity. As the king of Eleanor and the father of Tessia, I must apologize for this unsightly appearance of mine, and more importantly, I wish to thank you for escorting my daughter back home safely. He stated, his voice coming out a bit hoarse. Please accompany us to our home so that you may rest. After, you can tell us what happened. His tone was gentle, but implied that there wasn't really an option, so I simply nodded in consent. As I was about to follow behind them, Tess came up to me and grabbed my hand again, filling the surrounding people with expressions of shock. I couldn't help but chuckle uncomfortably as I scratched the side of my head, unable to muster up the appropriate words for a situation like this. Me too, Art. Me too. It's like, what do you do? Like, she's the princess, and everyone's like, okay, haha, princess, yeah. And then she starts acting like a kid, like, in front of this random human child. Like, it's so funny. Also, it is kind of weird that, like, everyone is acting so, like, okay, I get the king, right? He's the king, he has to act like kingly and whatnot, but the guards, like, everyone's just acting, like, too uptight for a 4-year-old. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, this man is literally damn near a baby. I don't know, I think it's funny. Anyways, Chapter 27, Meeting, Part 2. After a strenuously awkward ride that seemed a lot longer than it actually had been, we arrived at the castle. Rather than a castle, however, it looked to be an enormous tree. This tree that probably needed at least a few hundred people locking arms to encircle it was made of a white stone that, I could only guess, had gone through a petrification process somehow. Stepping through the front doors of the tree, I was pleasantly surprised to see how impressive the interior of this castle was. There were 2 curved staircases that created a circle, with a gigantic chandelier floating in the middle of it. This chandelier seemed to be made of the same orbs of light that were dotted throughout the city. I had told the king and queen that it wasn't necessary for me to rest and would rather tell them as soon as we arrived, so that's what we did. That's Arthur for you, as efficient as ever. Not even washing up, the welcoming group was all situated around the rectangular dining table downstairs. Tess's father was on the far end of the table with me directly opposite of him. Tessia's mother sat perpendicular to her husband, with Tessia seated right next to her. The grandpa was sitting across from the mother and daughter, leaving a pretty big gap between us, while the 5 guards stood off to the side behind the king. With both his elbows resting on the table, fingers intertwined. The king was the first to speak. Child, what did you say your name was? Forgive me for the late introduction. My name is Arthur Lanewind, and I come from a remote town in the kingdom of Sapin. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, king, queen, elder, and gentleman. I stood up and bowed slightly at each of them individually before sitting back down. Discussion wasn't going to progress if they were going to treat me like a child. Both the king and queen, as well as the guards in the back, showed evident looks of surprise from my mature behavior, while even the grandpa had an amused smirk on his face, Tess giving me a shy smile. That old man is one of my favorite characters, I'm telling you. Regaining composure, the king continued on. It seems you are much more mature than your age. Forgive me for assuming. My name is Alduin Aerolith, and this is my wife, Mariel Aerolith, and my father, Virian Aerolith. As for what happened, please tell us. We would like to hear your side of this. Waving off the apology, I began telling the story. I made sure to be very vague in telling them how I got inside the forest of Elshire in the first place. I simply told them I had gotten separated from my family after running into bandits, only managing to survive out of luck. Inevitably, I had to tell them I was a mage. This was followed by another wave of looks of utter disbelief from everyone, including Tess. slave traders. That meant bandits alike prey on not just elves, but humans as well, speaking as a victim myself. This caused the king to shut his mouth before sitting it back down, letting out a soft cough. I didn't ask the princess this, but I am curious as to how slave traders even got their hands on the princess of this kingdom, I queried, almost calling Tessia by her nickname. I didn't think calling her something so informal as Tess would sit right with everyone present. At this, the king almost looked embarrassed before saying, "My wife and I had a bit of a disagreement with Tessia, and she decided to rebel by running away. We had decided to let her cool off a bit before fetching her back because we knew where she usually stayed when she pouted. But unfortunately, she ran into some slave traders." Runaway princess. I snuck in a small grin at Tess, and she responded by sticking out her tongue, her face flushed. I glazed over the details of the fight with the slave traders. Luckily, I had caught the slave traders by surprise and managed to dispose of them before untying the princess and escorting her here. So a 4-year-old managed to luckily kill off 4 adults, one being an augmenter at that, and you simply wave it off like it's no big deal. Chimes in the king's father is seated across from Tess, leaning back on the chair so only 2 of the legs were touching the ground. Yes, half of them were asleep and the two were simply not on guard, so disposing of them was not too challenging. I refuted back. The elder just responded with a lazy shrug of his shoulder. After finishing the events, I cleared my throat before asking what I came here for. As I have mentioned, it has been almost 2 months since I've seen my... It's been more than that. Oh wait, no. Okay, yeah. I forgot he lied about how he, got to the Beast Glades. Right, okay. It's almost been 2 months since I've seen my parents. I do not plan to intrude on your kingdom for long, as I wish to meet them quickly. So I was wondering if you guys had a teleportation gate that could take me to the city of Xyrus or anywhere inside Zappin. You're leaving already, Art. Tess shot up from her seat, face stricken with panic. Both her mother and father gave each other a baffled look as they mouthed, "Art." The elder just shot a snide grin at this and chuckled, rocking in his chair. I don't think it's appropriate for a human such as myself to be inside this kingdom for too long, princess. Besides, I wish to make sure that my family is safe and tell them I'm okay as well, I answered, giving a sheepish smile. The king responds back for Tess. It has been a couple 100 years since the last human has stepped foot in the kingdom of Eleanor, and you, Arthur, are the first human to be in the capital of this kingdom, the city of Zestier. However, saving our daughter and taking the trouble to accompany her all the way back to us entitles you with a proper reward. I take a quick peek at Tess and see her head down, her gunmetal silver hair covering her face. Unfortunately, the teleportation gate linked with the kingdom of Zappin opens only once every 7 years for the summit conference between the 3 races. Since the last summit was 2 years ago, it'll be another 5 years until the gate will function. The king continued. I couldn't help but let out a deep breath of disappointment. However, we are more than willing to send a group of guards to escort you back home. You are correct that it may not be wise to stay in this kingdom for too long. While some are tolerant, many hold animosity towards humans because of the war long ago. He flashed a brief, sorrowful smile at this. I nodded in agreement. At least I'd be able to safely go back home. For now, please make yourself at home here. We will have your escorts prepared by tomorrow morning. I do advise you not to wander around outside the city, though, for the reasons mentioned earlier. The king snapped his finger and an elderly elf lady in a tan maid uniform rushed out, leading me to my room. It's hilarious to me because, okay, I get they asked him for, information on how all of this went down, and they obviously were surprised at, his maturity, but he's still 4. I know they don't exactly know his age, but he can't look any older than Tessia. From the comic, he doesn't. They look like they're the same age. And yeah, Tessia is well spoken, but she still, speaks like a kid. common for like 4 or 5 year olds to speak fluently in this world, I guess depending on their level of education. So I don't know. Maybe they just assumed that he was like extremely well educated. So I don't know. Next chapter. Chapter 28. Meeting. Part 3. The room I was led to was large, but elegantly simple in furnishings. While the only furniture consisted of a couch, tea table, bed, and dresser, each looked to be handcrafted out of wood by seasoned craftsmen. As soon as I got into the room, I closed the door behind me, stripped, and went straight for the bathroom. The shower was a pleasant surprise. It was a simple waterfall that seemed to naturally flow from the ceiling and drain back out into the floor. However, the constant flow of water that didn't seem to ever turn off was a surprisingly pleasant temperature, just warm enough to relax my body and pores. As I finished dressing into a very silky robe just for your top and short pants, I placed the stone Sylvia left me inside the chest pocket and once again tried to study my manicore. About 30 minutes in and making only minimal progress, I hear a knock on my door. Coming. Opening the door, I'm greeted by a pouting Tess who threw a light punch at my chest. "You dummy, why did you act all unfriendly when you were with my family back there?" she harumphed, slipping past me and sitting on my bed. "Well, first of all, you didn't mention to me that you happen to be the princess of this entire kingdom." Shaking my head, I gripped Tess's hand and pulled her out of my room. Kids or not, I didn't think her parents were going to like her being in a boy's room. "Come on, show me around the castle. I won't get the chance to visit this place again." I immediately regretted saying this. I hear a slight sniffle as Tess suddenly broke down into tears, trying to talk while sobbing. "Art, I don't want you to leave. You're the first person I've ever gotten close to." I gently patted her head while she was rubbing her eyes with the arm not holding onto my hand. As we continued walking in silence, except for Tess's soft sniffles, we made it outside to the courtyard at the back of the castle. The floating orbs were giving off a dim, luminescent glow, lighting up the well-kept garden in a gentle atmosphere. I couldn't help but imagine how differently this scene could have been played out if we were 10 years older. Before I even had the chance to finish my thought, a blatantly clear, killing intent bombarded my senses. Milliseconds later, a faint glimmer gave off the position of a projectile aimed at Tess. I pushed the still-crying princess out of the way and prepared to parry the projectile with a mana-infused hand. At that instant, a figure in black faced my back, his right arm in a stance to attack. Grabbing the projectile, I immediately spun myself to block the assassin with whatever was thrown at me. To my surprise, I was face to face with Tessia's grandfather. I jumped back out of range before angrily shouting, "What the hell? Why are you trying to kill us?" "Kid, it may hurt a little, but I doubt that toy you're holding could kill anyone," he chuckled. I looked down at my hand to see a pencil-sized projectile with both ends blunted and coated in a layer of something close to rubber. I was tricked. Nice reaction, nice reaction. I didn't think you'd catch my little present and use it to block my next attack. Truly marvelous. However, your usage of mana was mediocre at best. He proceeded to throw me a wooden sword fit for my size as he took out a wooden sword of his own, just a bit bigger. Here I come. Not even giving me the time to get in stance or even the chance to accept this impromptu training, he dashed towards me. This crazy old bat. I love Varian so much. Oh my god. I lowered my stance and instead of being defensive, I launched myself at him as well, accelerating the speed to throw off the timing of his swing. Aiming for the fingers gripping his sword, I swung upward, reinforcing my entire body. Right before my sword came in contact with his hand, I was met with only air as he disappeared from my sight. Whipping my head back, I spotted him a couple of meters apart from where I was standing. "You're a scary little brat, aren't you? Looks like I'll have to be a bit more serious," the grandpa smirked. His speed increased even more. Even with the previous life of only training in battles, I was only barely able to keep him in my sight. However, being able to see him and being able to respond to his attacks were two different things. I felt like a sandbag as I could only curse at my own body. I was able to block one move of his reason I was able to somewhat keep up was by using sword techniques and footwork to minimize my movement, along with the fact that because of my size, I was a small target. After about 10 long minutes of being treated like a wooden training post, I started noticing some patterns in the grandpa's attacks. As he flashed behind me, about to do a horizontal sweep to my legs, I put all of my strength into my legs and leaped back with my sword tucked into my armpit, pointing at his head. With a solid thud created from my blow landing, the old bat stumbled a little before gaining balance. I guess I deserved that one, he laughed, rubbing his swollen forehead. Throughout all this, Des was surprised at first, but after realizing it was just a spar, she settled down. She used this chance to jump out and stomp towards the elder. Grandpa, you hurt Art too much. You should have gone easier on him. She pinched the elder's side. Ah, that hurts, little one. I'm afraid if I went easier on Arthur, he'd be the one bullying me. He gently answered as he picked up his granddaughter. He flashed just in front of me and suddenly placed his right palm onto my sternum. Just as I thought, your body is in a dangerous state. I stared blankly at him. Through constant use of mana rotation and meditation, my body should be a lot healthier than even the most well-fed 4-year-old. Virian, noticing my doubtful gaze, pressed his palm on my sternum at a certain angle, triggering a familiar searing pain. Your mana manipulation is good for a beginner despite your age, and your sword techniques and fighting experience are frightening enough to make me wonder what sort of life you had led to learn all of this. His eyes narrowed, but you failed to mention one critical thing in your story earlier. I could feel my heartbeat beginning to rise as I started to suspect that he found out about Sylvia. I've decided. Arthur, become my disciple. He nodded, throwing me entirely off guard. Oh my god. I'm telling you, man, I love Virian. He's like probably top 3 of my favorite characters in this entire story. Arthur being the first one, obviously, but dude, I love Virian. He's so, like, he has all this energy about him, and like he's so chill, but he can get serious when he needs to be, obviously, but he's so cool. I love him. I apologize for that loud sniff and any other noise you may have heard in the background, but yeah, that's gonna be it for today. We're really, this is where the story gets like really good. Like, it's already gotten good, but it just keeps getting better and better. Oh my god. That was a lot though. I know last time I said I was going to do 5 parts per video, but I'm